Hello and welcome. I am Silas Goldman. My guest today is Carl Marullo. Carl's Vice President of Business Operations for global outsourcing leader V Technologies. Carl's going to share with us some insights from his new white paper on force majeure. Carl, thank you so much for joining us today. What is it in the industry right now that's making force majeure a hot topic that applies to us all?
Yeah, thanks, Silas. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I think everybody is well aware of the elephant in the room with COVID-19 and coronavirus. First, let me take a step back a little bit in case some people aren't completely familiar with what force majeure is. The actual translation of force majeure from Latin means a higher force or power, something beyond an ordinary person's control. Now, typically in outsourcing agreements that customers have with vendors, most of them have a clause called force majeure. It typically is in the back of the agreement. In the past, nobody has paid really a great deal of attention to it, but in some agreements don't have it at all. But what has happened over the last 6 months is COVID-19 has taken the subject of force majeure from the back pages of agreements and placed it front and center of both vendors and customers with provider contracts. Vendors were faced with closing work centers, not only in one geographic location, but sometimes in many different locations that were all impacted by this pandemic. Clients couldn't deliver the volumes that they committed to because their own business went away. And things that both vendors and clients thought would never happen, happened.
I think we can all agree that this is universally applies to all, especially given the details that you just outlined. And being in your role, you've seen just about everything that could be thrown at a contract in the world of force majeure. What is it that's uniquely different about the current context we're in now versus the application of force majeure in the past?
Yeah, what's interesting, and I talk a little bit about it in the white paper, is one of the key tenets of force majeure is that the event was unforeseeable. I don't think anybody going forward is going to say that a pandemic is unforeseeable because it's happened. So in the white paper, some of the topics I talk about is, what typical provisions are in a force majeure clause, what really constitutes a force majeure event and what's not a force majeure event. And also, just because you are in a legitimate force majeure event doesn't mean that you could just throw your arms up and go home. You still have obligations as a vendor, even in light of a force majeure event. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the lessons learned over the past 6 months, on some of the things to look out for, and perhaps one of some of the best practices in drafting a force majeure clause in an outsourcing agreement.
So Carl, without giving too much away, what's just a few key points of your paper that you would like to share today?
Well, I think the key aspects are, first of all, you need to be as detailed and specific as possible as to what is a force majeure event. Now, typically you didn't see, or in many times you didn't see references to pandemic or disease or things like that. The classic things you'd see is act of war, natural disaster, and so on. So yeah, some people can argue that COVID is a natural disaster, but if it specifically says pandemic, it's pretty open and shut case that that's a force majeure event. Also, what you need to pay attention to is, let the agreement be clear on what responsibilities you have in a force majeure event. If you're a vendor, it's going to talk about what actions should you be taking to try and mitigate the effects of the event. And if you're a client, because obviously a client, still has a business to run or services that they need, they will provide the vendor with a reasonable amount of time to find a workaround. But at the end of the day, they'll be released from their obligations and free to try and get the service from somebody else. So to the extent that those could be clearly articulated in the agreement, I think that serves both parties well in knowing exactly what's expected from each in light of the situation.
Carl, I am intrigued, and I sincerely thank you for your time today. We hope all you guys will enjoy Carl's white paper on force majeure. To download the full version, please visit us at vtechnologies.com. Thank you.